Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Beyond the Trailer Park. Don't ask me why my title screen froze, but it's live. Something's got to fuck up at some point. Anyway, it's a full house this evening. Everybody is here, which is awesome. So, of course, always from the wilds of Pennsylvania. Good evening, Beth.
Good evening.
And all the way from oh so crazy Maine. Hi there, Tracy.
Hello.
But you put on a good fare. At least there's that, right?
We put on a lot of good fares. If you like tractor pulls and
yeah,
livestock, we got it going on.
And over from the craziness of Mississippi, good evening, Morgan.
Good evening.
And then joining us from Western Canada, nice to have another Canuck on the show for once. Good evening, Esther Palmer.
Hello there. Thank you.
And this is Esther's Hangout debut, so, you know.
Yes.
She's doing well, though. She hasn't messed anything up. I could hear her right away. It's awesome. You know, I got people, we've had people with, you know, multiple degrees on this show that couldn't do that well, so.
Oh, okay.
Oh, well. So, Esther, if you're wondering, you know, Esther, she's an awesome lady, but why is she extra special? Esther comes from a really unique background, out in a place called, well, we call it sort of I don't know if that's the actual name, but it goes by Bountiful. And it is a fundamentalist Mormon community that a lot of people probably don't know exists in Canada. So you have a fascinating story for sure. And I know when I told the other ladies that you were going to come and join us, they were very excited and said we need to ask her all the things. But if you want to give us a little bit of your story and just sort of the Coles Notes version, so we have an idea of what your experience has been like, we can start there, I think.
Okay. So my I was born into the Mormon fundamentalist polygamist community of Bountiful is right near Creston, BC. So we're really close to the USA border there. But the community in Bountiful was largely began by about there was 4 or 5 men, but my father, he had 5 wives and 47 children. So I was just brought up to believe from a very, very young age that this would be my life and carry on from there. I ended up at 16 being placed by a man who had, I was his second wife. He had married my sister 7 years earlier. And together with the 2 of us, we had 19 children. So I lived there for 45 years and I left 5 years ago. So I feel like what I would like to do is kind of give a really brief
Absolutely.
I'm sorry?
Absolutely. Yeah, brief sort of background.
History, yes. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Okay. So I don't know. I'm sure everyone has met what we call mainstream Mormon. So the Mormon Church, of course, Joseph Smith at 14, God told him to do a bunch of stuff. So the Mormon Church was started in 1835. And then it was 1886. Now, Joseph Smith in the 1840s received, God talked to him and told him that polygamy was a thing and that he needed to live it. And I would like to actually read you a little bit of that later on. But in 1886, then for however the government was able to put pressure on the mainstream Mormon church, which at that time I think largely was in Utah, around this,
Yes.
in Salt Lake City. So they were able to convince the Mormons to give up polygamy. So the FLDS church carried on, and they, of course, believed that they were the true Mormons. Believe that the mainstream Mormons were all apostates, and there was actually, according to the history, I guess there was two groups that were formed. There was the Allred group and the FLDS group. FLDS just means fundamentalists, Latter-day Saints. So both of those groups, and since then there's been groups. We call them splinter groups, whatever, all over in a lot of parts of the States and obviously Canada. So we were a part of it's a much larger community that ended up, as we speak, it's Warren Jeffs is the prophet of that group that we call today the FLDS. And the main part of that group is in Colorado City, Arizona.
Yes.
So my dad, he was born and raised in mainstream Mormon church, and when he was he was married in the temple, married his first wife, and then him and his father-in-law were really delving into the church history, and that's where they found out that they weren't really living Mormonism, right?
Yep.
So they found out that God said that you had to be a polygamist, you had to marry more than one woman, right? And so he and my grandfather got together, and in the 1940s moved from Alberta to Creston or Bountiful, right?
Yes.
So that I was actually born right within that community. So there was my father, I don't know, a lot of people know Winston Blackmore, because he's now, in the public eye, because he's going through the court system as a convicted polygamist.
Yep.
And so Winston is my uncle.
Okay.
And my grandfather, Ray Blackmore, was one of the men. There was my dad, Dalmanoler, and then there was Quintons and Palmers that were sort of the main men there. So what tends to happen in the in the Mormon fundamentalists, is that every time a prophet dies, then there's a split in the community. Yeah. So it's a very sad time.
They never agree on who's supposed to be the next prophet, basically. So
yes. So we experienced that it was right around 84 when Uncle Roy, or Leroy Johnson, died. And then Brian, my ex, he lost a lot of family members then. And then when Warren Jeff's dad, Rulon Jeffs, was prophet, he died around 2000, and that's when there was a split in Bountiful. It was basically right down the middle. There was half supported Winston Blackmore as their prophet, half supported Warren Jeffs. So I guess what I want to say again here is that my story is mine, right? Like, I don't claim to speak for anyone else. I want to say what I want to give as accurate a picture as I can of the community, and not make it what it isn't, right?
Of course.
And I know that each person, I was talking about this a while ago. My dad had 47 children. Each one of us would have had a different idea of him, who he was as a man, right?
For sure.
So I don't claim, to speak for anyone else, but the community, growing up there, it was very, we were very isolated. We had to dress a certain way. We had to go to private school. We attended church every Sunday, of course. And then we had visits from the prophets in the States. So when I was growing up, it was Roy Johnson, and he would come up maybe once a year and attend church in Bountiful. And then we would go down for April conference. And usually when he visited, that would be when marriages took place. So we knew that, I mean, I knew from a very young age that I would be told who to marry when I was 16. I would say yes, and I would marry this person, and I would have children, and this was the only way that I was going to ensure that I didn't burn in hell forever.
Right.
And I mean, I remember as a young girl, like, 14, thinking, oh my gosh, like, I only have 2 more years.
Oh.
And since I left, I've been trying to talk to people, and I mean, and trying to educate folks, and I've tried to answer the question, me being basically told to marry who I was to marry at 16. Did I really have a choice, right?
Yeah.
And after being told from a very young age that, this would just happen to you, and this is what, I always say that the 3 main messages we got from every church or family get together was always that you had to live polygamy to be saved. You had to strict obedience to your priesthood head, who was your dad until you were married, and then it was your husband. You had to make sure that you were married a virgin, and when you were told who to marry, this was what God wanted for you, right?
Yes.
So it was actually pretty scary, the whole event for me.
I bet.
It was actually the first time I'd had a conversation with my father. Like when you're one of 47, you kind of just get lost.
I was wondering, did you even ever spend any time with your dad? Because, I mean, he's got to be out providing for 47 children and however many wives. 5, I think you said, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, even with that, would he have time for any kids, let alone 47 of them? So was he kind of sort of there, but not there?
Well, I kind of describe it as like kind of living in an orphanage, which you knew that there were people taking care of the orphanage, but I personally did not have a relationship with my father at all. Like I said, the day that he told me who I was going to marry, that was the first conversation I'd had with him. So, we didn't see much of him. He, worked long hours. When I was growing up, he was the bishop of our community. So he also was trying to take care of, the rest of the community. And he just always, he was more just, he would speak to us in groups. Like he would speak to all of us girls at once.
Right. So it would be almost like, getting an assembly at a school, right? So
yes.
You get to, it's time for all the sisters to get a message from dad. So you just go and all sit together and hear what he has to say, and then on your merry way, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I was very close to some of my sisters, and they were more of a, like my older sisters were more of a parent to me.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
With a lot of the really large families, that tends to be the norm. Like especially in the quiverful households, you see that a lot, where they expect the older daughters to look after the younger children, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So, after I was married, then I moved in, obviously, to my husband's home, and of course had a baby within a year. And I had always really had wanted to, from a very young age, I'd wanted to be a nurse, but I knew that it would have to be, I'd have to get permission from my husband. And my mom was really pro-education, so the women there were, as best she could, the women there were allowed to become teachers because we wanted them to teach in our own private school. And
Right.
there were some nurses, there were some women that were allowed to be nurses. I think for the reason that they wanted the community to be able to be completely self-sufficient. So then, yeah, so then I was able to, I also took my midwifery training, and then at the time of the split, I was the only midwife for the FLDS side of the community. And I did that for 9 years, and things just sort of, we carried on, and then things started to really get much more difficult after Warren Jeffs was put into power.
Yes. I've heard some crazy stories about that guy.
Yeah, so he, right away, when he took power, he excommunicated many of the prominent men. Well, I guess you wouldn't call it excommunicated. He basically said that they had to go away and repent. They'd done something wrong. He reassigned wives. But this, in the beginning, it felt quite distant from us because we were in Canada, right?
Right.
And we had our bishop, who at the time was my brother James Oler, because Winston had been the bishop in Canada, but now with him taking his own flock,
Yes.
then we had a new bishop in Canada. So with Jim as our bishop, then, and I don't know, like over the next few years, many men were sent away. They called them repentance missions or whatever. And Warren just went into hiding, and then he wasn't performing any more marriages. He, which was really good for the women, the young girls, but not so much for the young men who were getting older and older, and weren't being allowed to be given a wife, and so things got very depressing and very strict. And
did they ever have an idea of why he decided to nix doing marriages, or just because he was hiding?
Well,
he would have had the power to send like somebody he trusted to stand for him, wouldn't he?
Well, he would have, except for it's kind of unheard of.
Ah, okay.
So he was marrying women to himself.
Of course. He can do that.
But and as you know, I mean, he ended up with more than 40 wives and 7 of my own cousins.
Oh, wow.
From Canada, the youngest being 12. But in that time, a lot, like, we didn't really, up in Canada, we didn't really know a lot of what was going on. It was very secretive, and there was rumors that the girls that disappeared from Canada at 12 and 13, 14 were being married to him, but nobody was to know. It was all hush, hush, or whatever, right?
Yes.
So as the mainstream, I mean, not the mainstream, but I mean, the rest of us in Canada following him, we, just sort of buckled down and tried to become, tried to follow all the rules, which was more and more difficult.
He kept.
I was going to say, how do you follow rules when they change every day?
Well, I think that I don't even know how he kept track of all the stuff we were supposed to do, but every single day, whether it was weekend, holiday, Christmas, New Year's, everyone got up at 5 o'clock, and your day started with your first family class, which was half an hour of reading sermons and Warren's Revelations, and then you went on to it's just, I mean, the list was on and on. You had to, of course, we had to sew all our own long underwear and long clothing, and we had to, once a month, we had to wash every item in the home down to the bobby pin in your drawer.
Oh, dang.
And we were like,
rude.
well, I tried to get out of it, but my kids would all, but by this time, our family consisted of Brian's sister, who her husband had been sent away 5 years earlier. So she had 11 kids. We had still about 15 at home, or a dozen. And a lot of these people were young adults.
Yeah.
Because they had gotten 18, 19. Warren had been in jail for years. Nobody was allowed to carry on with their lives. So we had a dozen adults in our home with Rebecca's children and Brian's first wife and my children. So that was a little challenging, to say the least.
So you only ever had 2 wives then?
Yes.
So,
but
I thought my understanding was you had to have 3 to get into heaven.
Well, that's a little, well, there's many men in the Bountiful community and in the, FLDS in the States that only had 1 wife. There was just not enough women to go around.
Funny that. When
yeah.
When one guy's got 40 of them, what the hell?
Well, I know, right? And I don't know why God only gave, 50-50 of women, men and women, right?
If there was supposed to be like per guy, then everybody should have, when you're having 10 or 20 kids, you should have like 2 guys and the rest are girls.
Yeah, so God really messed up there, right?
Yeah, not to get this whole
because we had 19 kids and there was 11 boys. There was 11 sons.
Damn.
Right? So
did they ever try to explain that disparity from an official church stance? Did they ever try to explain that? Well, God didn't create enough women. Did they ever try to explain that officially?
Well, the only thing that was because I asked the question a couple of times, and they would say things like, well, a lot less boys are faithful.
Oh.
And a lot less boys are faithful because they require, like, for example, there's no, you weren't allowed to masturbate. Men weren't, or boys weren't, and so they could be sent away if someone if they confessed that they. Yeah. But they never asked the women.
Isn't that funny? Every sperm is sacred, but who cares?
It sounds like one big old competition between, the higher ups wanting all these wives and, screw the little people in the church.
Well,
I've read, sorry, Deb, I've read in the past that they were often looking for a pretext to excommunicate or send away the younger men so that the older, more prominent men had, first dibs on the wives. Is that true?
Yeah.
Well, I've heard people talk about the lost boys or men that, but in my experience, I just saw them making the jumps, the hoops that the boys had to jump through so extremely hard that they just gave up.
Right.
Like, because they had to they had to go to more meetings than us. They had to go and work in the world. And so they saw, and, I just noticed, in our own family that's like, they just said, okay, there's so many ways I can go to hell that I'm just going to give up because I'm never going to be good enough.
Yeah, that's so sad.
Yeah, it really is. Because, we saw so many of the young men and women, like my son, my oldest was like 25 at the time, and had already given 14 years of his life to the church, of, working on post cruise, handing over every bit of the money he made. And he was seeing that he was never going to be given a wife, because he had to wait until Warren's out of jail.
Oh, good God. Yeah, that's not
When
good.
is he getting out of jail again?
Never.
Apparently, yeah. But he tries to tell people that this was preached to us every day. At our 5 o'clock meeting, almost every day, I could say, is my ex would get up and he would say, okay, if everyone, all the children, don't make one mistake today, follow all the rules, then by tonight, Warren Jeffs could be walking into our home and blessing us. And
no.
So the official sentence of Warren Jeffs is life in prison plus 20 years.
Oh, we better be getting a cab. Somebody better be coming to get him pretty soon here. So what were you told about Warren Jeffs, like why he went to jail? Were you all told it was, oppression by the government or something of that nature?
Yes. So it was told that to us that, the devil gets really angry when he sees such good people and what they're doing. And so he convinces all these evil men to take down someone as good as Warren. And lock him up so that he has to suffer in the name of God, and that as soon as he has a prepared people that will do everything they're told, and then Jesus will come back, take Warren out of jail, and we'll all meet in this one big happy place.
Oh, yes.
And that every day that he has to stay in jail, then it's because one of us weren't good enough.
Oh, shit.
Oh, good fucking God.
So when when we were told, like, we would go to meetings and the bishop would say, okay, which one of you is keeping Warren in jail?
Oh, damn.
And that's a big burden on a little kid.
Hell yeah.
Talk about mind control.
Wow.
So I finally told Brian, after you say my ex, like, I told him, okay, I want you to write down on a piece of paper everything exactly, like every minute of what you want me to do today. And if Warren doesn't walk into our home, which I didn't want him to, obviously, but tonight, then you are lying to us.
Yes.
Like,
wait, just quick, Esther. I think the sun's setting out there because you got so dark I can barely see you.
You are right. It is. Let me find a light here. Just a sec.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just like, she's fading away into nothing. Yeah, there we go.
Yay!
That's better. We can see her now. That's all right. And just to backtrack really quick, a question that I had in mind, because I don't know why I'm kind of obsessed with magic underwear, but did you guys have to wear the whole big long set? Or
yes.
Yeah. So in case other people haven't, I know we've talked about garments a lot on the show before, but the FLDS wore like the long johns variety, and you had to wear that shit under all that dress all the time.
Yes. So this is something you never should be seen without. Our father told us that if there was I guess the story comes from the Book of Mormon. I'm not sure exactly where, but if in the middle of the night there's supposedly some Native Americans that are going to come, and if they they will rip your dress open, and if you don't have the long underwear on, they will stab you in the heart.
Oh, that's new. I haven't that yet. Damn.
And it's kind of worrisome. It's basically when it's something that the long underwear is something that when you go through the temple in mainstream Mormon, then you're supposed to be given this long underwear.
Yes.
But even though we had no temples, they kind of, as far as I could tell, they kind of just adopted the idea of the long underwear. So when Warren came in, he made it the rule that every child also had to wear it.
Oh, geez.
So when I was growing up, we didn't have to, but then when Warren came in, so this is like 3-year-olds, and you can imagine how difficult it is to potty train a kid who's in full long underwear underneath leggings and a dress, and so that was a bit of a nightmare. But I can't remember, what were we talking about before this?
Well, we were talking about Warren Jeffs and how the bishopric were telling everybody that it was their fault that he was in jail and
yes,
screwed up and all. Like, that is just the amount of guilt that comes with that is just incredible. Like, I can just imagine being some little kid and you're at I don't know if you guys did Sunday school, but you're at church or whatever, and some big important adult that you have been taught to, you revere that bishop like crazy. And then they tell you to revere the prophet like crazy, and they're telling you that it's your fault that that prophet is in jail and is hurting the entire community. Like, I just can't even imagine that as a little kid. That is unreal.
Well, that's the indoctrination that's so perverse in a lot of these offshoot sects or cults, is that it's all a power trip. And what I don't get, especially in Warren Jeff's case, and is how he could justify changing a quote doctrine of the church, like going back to the long underwear.
But that's
like,
how.
Oh well, now kids gotta wear them. Well, why?
But that's how the Mormon Church works. Is it's
well, yeah,
a living church where God comes and changes stuff all the time, right?
Yeah, and that it just seems so. I mean, from an outsider's point of view, not being one. Well, I probably did some goofy things growing up, but it's just how an adult would see that as not being a man-made. I mean, just the mind control that's involved in cults. It just blows my mind. Pardon the.
When you are raised with it, for starters, you don't have that. You lose that ability to kind of go, wow, that's fucked up. Like, no, that's normal to you. Like as Esther said, growing up knowing that at 16, childhood's over, that was, even though, like she said, oh, damn, I've only got 2 years left of freedom, basically. That was just accepted. And I can just, like, that must have been very, well, like you said, it was scary, I imagine, to know that you literally had no control over any aspect of your life, right?
Yeah, I feel like that it's just all sold to you as that this, we are the only good people, the only people with morals. You have to, follow this path, right?
Yes.
And I think that it's you're at such an unfair you have such a disadvantage in that you're so little, right?
Yeah.
And you believe everything that you're told. And I do feel like that so many people, they are still like, they are victims of indoctrination. Like my mom and dad, they were both born into the Mormon church, and that's where it's so well, people nowadays, they wonder why you get so riled up about religion, and you're like, okay, this is why, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Through our talking, even before the show, one thing that's been nagging at me, considering all the indoctrination a person like you has gone through, how the fuck did you get out?
Yeah.
Well,
what got you out?
It was very difficult. I never ever imagined I would leave. I felt like I did not want to be a dishonor to my parents. I wanted I didn't want to displease God or the prophet. God and the prophet only do what's right. So what ended up happening was that as I could, so of my 9 children, my oldest daughter had left at the time of the split, so in 2001. So I still had 8 of my children, and I could just see how they were just losing. I was facing the fact that 2 more of my sons wanted to leave. I knew that, and I was just desperate. Like, I would talk to them and say, no, it won't be that much longer. Warren's getting out of jail soon. I didn't believe that, but I just did not want to lose my kids. I was like, when your son leaves, that's it. Like, there's a line in the sand. And I was told, when my son left, I was told, as a woman, if you make one contact with your son, we will put you on probation. And just meaning that, I would have people spying on me and making sure that I made no contact with my kids. And it's so scary to know that, one by one, my kids weren't going to stay, and I felt like there was nothing there for them. But when your kid leaves, you feel, like, like your child died, but you don't even get to grieve. You don't get to have a funeral. You can't even put pictures up. You feel like you've failed everyone, because they would always, and yet every one of the families was having kids leave because, Warren wasn't marrying any more children, or young adults, whatever. And it was just getting more and more rules, more and more depressing, more and more people were leaving. And so I started making my plan of escape, and I was hoping that Brian would get sent away. I thought that would be the easiest, because he was so worried that he actually, like, one day he actually had Warren Jeffs call him on the phone, and he said I was in the room when Warren was on the phone with him, and he said, and Brian was like, he was shaking. He was so scared, because he was afraid that he'd be sent away. And Warren asked him if he had his family, which included myself and his first wife and his sister. He said, do you have your family prepared to go to Zion with me? Because the community had been building, we'd been sending money and to build the Texas compound, and he was building these places that they would call, like, yearning for, well, we'll talk about it in a bit, but yearning for Zion Ranch. And Brian told him on the phone, he said no, he didn't think he had his family prepared. And, oh gosh, like, it was just the fear. I was so afraid that I would be sent away and they would keep my kids. And so I started, I started asking, I went to the women's shelter and I started asking them how they could help me get away. And I was fortunate in that I was a registered nurse. I didn't have money because we'd given it, right? Like you don't have, I didn't have control of my money. Like it's the husband's job. I had a joint account with him, and when the money came in, he took it. So, I mean, I knew I could do okay on my own though. And,
that was one good thing, is at least you had a skill to fall back on, because a lot of those women would not.
Yes. No, I was very fortunate that way. But I also, it was terrifying because I knew that at this point my kids, I knew they wouldn't all come with me. But I felt like that whether I was in or out, there were some of my kids I wouldn't get to see. And so I just felt like that what was happening was so wrong that I couldn't stay. And we talked to the police because I had no idea how I could force my kids into a vehicle with me. At this time in February, 4 men, including my ex, had been sent away. So I had no contact with him at all. We were not to try to contact our husbands when they were sent away.
Right.
So I want to tell a little bit about how the events that happened around him being sent away.
Absolutely.
So we all were heading off to church, and then when we got home, the bishop at the time was Warren Barlow in Canada. So we all get home after church, and Warren comes into our living room and he says, "Okay, everybody gather around," and we all suspected it at this point, right? But he said, "Okay, Brian's been sent away. No one's to get a hold of him. Nobody talk about why he's been sent away. Warren Jeffs is now," he told myself and Brian's first wife that you are no longer married to Brian. The children are no longer to call him their father. Their father is now Warren Jeffs. And they are to be placed under the care of one of Brian's sons, Brian Jr. So now I was, because women are not, they can't hold the priesthood. They're not really a value, I suppose. I don't know how you'd say it. They always have to be accountable to a man, right?
Right. Yeah.
So we couldn't, like, for example, I couldn't have been in charge, or the first wife in charge of our family, right? So we had to report to Brian Jr. He then reports to the bishop, and then it goes on, right? Yes. So of course there was a lot of crying.
Oh yeah.
There was at least 20 some children in the room, and everyone started to cry because we had not known, and I still don't, of a man that ever was allowed back home.
Yeah.
So Brian's sister, she had been moved in with us, and her husband, when they moved in with us, had been gone 7 years, and he is still gone.
Wow.
So that's like 12 years now. And, these kids didn't ever think they'd see their dad again.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot better with him gone, because at that point, toward the end of 2011, no one was allowed to have anything to do with their partner anyways. The men were not to sleep in the same bedroom as the women. There was to be no sex. And so the last babies that were born.
I was just going to say, it's almost as if Warren Jeffs was visiting part of his punishment on the rest of the community. Like, I can't be with my wives. I can't have sex with anybody. I can't do this or that. Well, neither can you. Do you think that had anything to do with it?
I don't really know. It's so hard to, like, for example, when I asked, you know, like, this is kind of bizarre, you know. Before it was like you were all supposed to have children, and now it's like nobody has children. The only thing that they did read a passage in church that said, "Woe unto them that is with child in the last days."
I was just going to bring up, is there a doomsday aspect to this whole not having children crap?
And there you go.
There it is.
There it is.
He's turning it into a doomsday cult by way of Heaven's Gate.
Well, I think it kind of has been for a long time.
Yeah.
Because that was, I mean, some of my earliest memories as a child were nightmares about the end of the world.
Oh, that's just so sad to think of having to go through as a kid. And I mean, I remember the first time somebody told me that I had to, you know, ask Jesus into your heart or you're going to hell. And I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old. And that scared the shit out of me. And it wasn't even that, you know, big of a detail. And here you guys are getting that is just, wow.
One of my kids, he was one that's obviously left, but he said every night his prayer was that he would die in his sleep,
so that he could go to heaven right away.
So that, because it just felt so, you know, like it felt so dire. I mean, every day it felt like that you were constantly being watched, and that things that you did would, you know, like put your whole family in jeopardy, and of not being allowed into Warren's heavenly group, you know, like to gather to welcome Jesus back to earth. And I don't know, it just a lot of fear. And of course, the events at the end of 2011 were that by the end of that year, we were to have a storehouse built where we were to give everything we had, down to the panties in our drawer, to the storehouse, and the bishop would decide if we got anything back. So by this time, we were just happy to get rid of all our stuff because we were having to wash it every month.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, just take it all. I don't care, right? You feel so depressed. It's like, we don't care, you know? Take it all. But at the same time, it was kind of depressing, for sure.
Yeah, because you, on one hand, like you say, it would have been kind of freeing feeling, but then on the opposite, you're like, what's coming next if I don't have any stuff?
Clothing, right?
Yeah.
Or if the bishop doesn't decide that you need anything back, right?
What does that mean for you? Yeah.
I know. I mean, I don't know.
Be waiting for the other shoe to drop all the time, I'd imagine.
Well, and all the time, more people were getting sent away. Nobody would ever say why. And so, like, you didn't know, like, you know, you might, but, so all the men were working feverishly to get the storehouse ready, and everyone was supposed to, of course, obey, like, make sure they were doing all of the things that they were supposed to do. By this time, there was no texting, no toys, books only read by FLDS, no, obviously, interactions within partners. The boys were to eat at a different table than the girls. We were supposed to eat certain foods. Of course, a lot of the girls weren't supposed to have cell phones. So yeah, we would go to meetings, and they would read Revelations of Warren Jeffs, which I don't know if you've ever read one.
No, but I've heard some audio. Did you not find him to be incredibly creepy? Because I sure as hell do.
Well, definitely toward the end there. Thankfully, we actually didn't see him much up here in Canada, right?
That's good.
But we did hear a lot of audio, and a lot of his revelations were read.
Yeah.
And we were to have individual interviews, and the bishop would decide if we were worthy or not to be included in the Holy United Order. So the Holy United Order was something that was set up back in Joseph Smith's time, but a lot of people didn't ever live it.
Right.
But the idea of it is that, you know, everyone goes out and works and gives money for the common good, and the bishop decides as long as you're a member in good standing, then you might get something back, right?
Yep.
And it just puts a lot of power on a few individuals. And I think that's where things can go drastically wrong, which we've seen happen, right?
Yes.
But we were headed, like, we all had to make appointments with the bishop, and we sat in the church house waiting, and the children down to 8 years old had to go in all alone, and there would be 2 or 3 men. And I wasn't okay with that, but I voiced that to my husband, and he said, no, this is what they want, and so this is what will happen. But during your interview, you would be asked things like, have you ever thought an unpure thought? You know, are you keeping all your commandments? And I think that was where the young men were asked if they'd ever touched themselves and that sort of thing, right?
Right.
So then after that, all the interviews, then we found out later that there was at least 1 or 2 members in every family that didn't get the letter that said they were worthy. So a lot of crying, a lot of sadness.
Great. Because you're taught that these are connections that are meant to go on for all eternity. So if your sister or your spouse or your mom or somebody gets told they're not going, you believe that you're being separated from them forever.
Well, yes, and Warren Jeffs had said that by the end of 2011, there would be a judging of all his people, and those who were not deemed worthy by the end of 2011 were not to it. It wasn't like you had to leave the entire community, but you could not associate with anyone who was worthy. And so
I might be confusing religious beliefs here. Is that tied into the whole notion of the 144,000? Or is that J-dubs?
That's J-dubs.
Okay, forget that question then.
So anyways, it was like a week before the end of 2011, and of course the anxiety levels were extreme in the community. And I came home from work one day, and they were taking the entire family to go get baptized into the Holy United Order, and I immediately kind of put 2 and 2 together and decided that I was one of the ones that wasn't worthy. And of course, it was a very scary time for me. I just started weeping right away, and I asked my husband, like, why? And he said, all I know is that, the prophet didn't say that God gave him your name. And so I was scared to death. I was worried, okay, where would I go? Where would I live? I didn't care about the prophet at that point. I didn't care about anything. I just cared about my kids. Yeah. And to have my son being taken away from me, and no one told me, I was just, it was really a really tough time for me. I said, you know what, we've always thought we'd look forward to baptism in our family. It's not supposed to be like this. Anyways, it was, and then I messaged my mother, who I knew she was helping with all the baptisms in the community, and I said, what am I to do? I said, I have a client that's going to deliver any day now.
Yeah.
And I was only to be midwife to the FLDS. And I said, what should I tell her? Like, should I tell her I can't be her midwife? Do I need to talk to some doctor that might accept care? I said, anyways, I said, they've taken my children, mother. What should I do? You know, I was very, very distraught. And she told me, I'll see what I can do, daughter. And that was all. And then I right away, I got an appointment with the bishop, and I said, what do I need to do? I said, what did I do? And he said, well, have you disobeyed any rule? And despite the fact that I had texted my son, I lied, and I said, no, I have not.
Yeah.
I said, I haven't broken any rules. And I said, and he said, well, you know, are you and your sister wife loving each other? You know, is there any discord in your home? Like, he just started, and of course I lied, and because I told my husband, and I told him, I said, I will do whatever you want me to do. I said, you tell me. I said, I will pray more fervently. I will, you know, I was in such a state of anguish.
Yeah.
And so I went home, and of course my children didn't know what to say to me. They knew I wasn't in the order. And then 6 o'clock at night on the last day of 2011, I got a call, and they said I was now worthy.
Oh, goodness. You must have been very relieved.
I was. And so I got to go, and I got to listen to what my children had listened to a week earlier. And one of the things that really stuck with me was they said, isn't it great that you are now in the Holy United Order, because everyone who is not is wicked and an adulterer, murderer, whatever, and going to hell. And all I could think of is, you know, this is what they told my children a week ago about me. And yeah, just a lot of fear. And then I ended up leaving in May of 2012, so I was only there another 5 months. But I got the help of the. I just got really good at lying after that.
You would. And I would like to point out that the bishop's power of discernment really sucked.
Oh, I know, right? Like, you know, because
somebody who's a bishop and a priesthood holder, they're supposed to be able to tell magically when someone is lying and not being as righteous as they should be. And yeah, that we know that doesn't work.
Well, and I was just sort of racking my brain trying to think, like, how, like, did someone tell that they'd seen me talking to my son who had left? And the only thing I could think of, I can hear some background noise. Is that?
That's math. No? Tracy, it's you. Yep, there we go.
Okay. So the only thing I could think of was that we had, during the interview process and them sort of weeding out family members, then one of the young men had been told by the bishop, he'd been told that your sister is a whore and she has to leave. And he was so upset that I guess he stood up and he started, you know, yelling, or I don't know exactly, I wasn't there, but the bishop said at that point, he said, well, if it make you feel better, then you can hit me. And so the young man slugged him in the face.
Wow.
Of course, at that moment, he was taken down by the bodyguards, the 2 other men, and at that time, the bishop had to go get eye surgery.
Whoa. I guess he won't be making that offer again.
No. And anyways, a lot of the young men that had been, they were being sent away, and there was so much frustration. And then my oldest son, I came across my husband telling my youngest son that my oldest was threatening the bishop. He was threatening to do harm to the bishop because this young man that had punched the bishop was now their hero, right? Because they were all mad at the bishop.
Yep.
And the bishop had never met my son. And so I was really angry that my husband would try and make him seem like an evil person to my youngest son. I said, yeah, you've heard the bishop say that my son is calling him. I said, but he has never met my son. How would he know who's calling him? Because the Warren Jeffs had appointed us a new bishop at this time, right? He was another man that he had sent from the States.
Yep.
Anyways, because they kept we would go through bishops because they kept doing, I don't know. He would appoint one and then send him away, and it was all really chaotic. But anyways.
Imagine he would find, once he appointed someone, he would probably get paranoid that they were going to try and take over or something.
You're right. That was probably a thing, right? But so anyways, I was just upset, and I called the bishop up and I said, is my son threatening your life? And he said, yes. And I said, do you know what he sounds like? Do you know his phone number? I was just upset that he was accusing him of this, right?
Oh, for sure.
And all he said to me is he said, have you talked to your son? And I said, yes, I have. I said, I don't want him to hurt you. And he said, if God wants me dead, then your son will kill me.
Ooh.
And I said, well, yes, I have talked to him, and I don't want him to hurt anyone. And so I said, but I just don't know how you would know if he's actually the one calling you, because, it could have been anybody, right?
For sure.
And
so at this point, you're admitting that you're talking to your son that you're not supposed to be talking to.
Yes, and that was the only thing that I could think that they were getting me for. Right. Was that he knew at that point that I had talked to my son, and I was trying to defend my position that, I'm only trying to keep the peace here.
For sure. Because
my sons are very big, and I think if he wanted to hurt the bishop, I think it would have been bad. And, there was a lot of anger and frustration at the time. So anyways, I came home that night after being baptized and read 4 hours of Warren's Revelations. And I was in the car, and my son, who at the time was 8, he ran out to me and hugged me, and he said, now I have a mother.
Oh,
fucking God.
That's so awful. Poor kid. Wow.
Well, and I don't know, it was just, so when I was trying to decide, okay, how do I get, because between then, my son turned 9, but how do we get a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old into a car when they know that I'm not the boss of the family, right?
Yeah.
And tell them, because, they
would be just as soon to say, if you said, come on, let's get in the car, we're going for a drive, they would say no, because they would know that you weren't supposed to do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they really, all my family kind of sensed that I was going to do this, right?
Right.
I couldn't tell any of my kids. We couldn't talk.
No.
But I think because, well, they knew that, first I wasn't worthy, and, just it's hard to keep that to yourself, that you don't just follow along.
I'm surprised that nobody wondered, well, especially when you did finally go, that, well, wait a minute, how could the bishop not have known that she still wasn't worthy when he said that she was worthy, and then she buggered off 5 months later?
Like, well, I mean, the interesting thing too was that there was 4 men that were told to go the same time Brian left. It was February 19th. Right. And so the end of December, just a month and some earlier, they had all been baptized into the Holy United Order. So exactly on the same day of February, they all did something really bad. And so they were all sent away, right? So that doesn't make sense either, right?
The world's shittiest discernment. Like, just give up already. You can't discern anything.
Well, in your case, too, one week you were not worthy, and the next week you're getting baptized.
Yeah.
What changed?
Nothing.
I mean,
well, they would have.
I mean, not to disparage you. I mean, I'm just saying it's like that's asinine. I mean, 1 week, and then you pulled a few strings by the sounds of it with your mom, and then all of a sudden it just discernment is sorely lacking.
Well, I think what happened was that I think she was able to tell the bishop, because the bishop didn't know me either. He was a new bishop brought up from the States.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
She was able to tell him that I was the midwife, and so they probably shouldn't get rid of me right away. All right?
At least as everybody's no longer pregnant.
But if he was so discerning and such a man of God, or man of warm Jeffs in this case, he should have known that. He shouldn't have needed your mother to tell him that.
He should have been able to pray and get guidance. It's
that's just so.
Or have
crazy.
Common sense that if there's only one midwife and there's still pregnant ladies, maybe you might want to keep her around for a while.
Well, you just get, I just got better at lying and concealing what I was doing, right?
Which is always what happens when you're in a fear-based community. That's just the way it goes.
But on the so my plan was to leave in the middle of the night. I wanted to leave at like 2 a.m. because we had, I don't know if you've heard of God Squad in the States, but we had men driving around the community at night. And they were all supposed to take shifts and just make sure. Basically, it was in Canada, and I don't know, that's all I can speak for, is it was because at the time of all this judging and people in the order and out of the order, then there was a lot of angry young men, and they would come, like they would try to vandalize the storehouse, and like they were just frustrated, and so that was more what it was. Like, it wasn't necessarily designed to try to stop people from leaving. There was always an open road, right? Yeah. Once you control someone's mind, you don't have to put a gate up. Absolutely. But my hope was to, so I had my sister, she was going to come help me, because I said, okay, I'll put the child in the car. The police said they couldn't physically hold on to my children. And I said, if you you take a hold of him for me, and then I'll go and get my other child, and maybe we can drive off. I don't know. We'll try it. Yeah. But we also felt like if we had the police go with us, they were in plain clothes, that maybe they would listen to them. So the chief of police in Creston, he told me that no, he wanted me to be up front with my priesthood head and tell him what I was doing and try to get him to help me. So that was a big mistake. By this time, like, I had rented a place in Cranbrook. I had everything ready. I had nothing except for I was using my my son's car at the time, and just a few clothes that I had packed, and of course I had packed nothing for my kids because I wasn't telling them.
Yep.
And so I had the two policemen with me. Well, one was actually Shelley Livingston, which she's done a lot with prosecuting polygamy. And we walked up to the house and told my priesthood head that I told him this is what I want to do, and I said that, would you please tell my children they need to come with me, because I knew if he would, then my kids
they would listen.
Yeah. Well, at least I had a better hope, right?
Yeah.
So my son was asleep in my bed because he, being my youngest, he still, I don't know, we felt safer that way somehow. And by this time, like, my husband was never in my bedroom, so he Bride Jr. immediately called the bishop, and they called the night watch. There was 3 trucks with men pulled up. My daughter, my oldest daughter, still in there. She's still in there today. She sensed what was going on. She ran into the house. She took my kids out the back door. They got into a vehicle and they drove off.
Oh, that's awful.
So we ended up 2 hours standing in front of my house. I eventually asked the police if they'd please tell these men to leave. There was kind of they were trying to get a hold of, it was one of my adult children that took my kids, and they're trying to get a hold of him and said, you really have to bring the kids back, But about 11 o'clock that night, then Brian, my ex, who had been gone for 3 months, drove into the yard.
Oh boy.
So we had a whole other situation which I did not anticipate at all.
Oh, so you think they called him and told him to come back and deal with
it? Yeah. So wherever he was, it took him a couple hours to get there. But I ended up meeting with the police and Brian and the kids next morning, and what followed was 2 years of just absolute, my kids would show up at the house and take my younger kids, my adult kids, and other members of the community would show up and take them, and it was just a battle.
Oh.
We had restraining orders against my husband and some of my adult children, but we would have had to get restraining orders on the entire community because they were all in it together, right?
They would just rotate who would show up and try and take them again.
And of course, my kids were really afraid of public school and afraid, and rightly so. They had been told their whole lives that, and now I was taking them to hell, basically, right? And so when my adult daughter and her friend actually moved next door to me, and it was then that I just quit fighting with my youngest daughter. And then 2 years later, when my youngest went back to the community, I called them and I said that I'm not gonna force him to try and come with me, that he'll have to do what he feels like he needs to do. But my youngest was taken out of my home in the middle of the night, and when I called the police the next morning, because this is from my home in Cranbrook,
yes.
then he said, well, we're treating it as a runaway.
What?
It's a kidnapping.
I know. And I said, you can't tell me, if I was working night shift at the hospital. He was asleep in his bed at 11 o'clock at night, and by 7 in the morning, he was in Bountiful. And I said, you can't tell me that he on his own accord ran home, an hour and 15-minute drive.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot of frustration, and And so part of, stemmed from that, like I really want to try and educate the police and just try and let them know that, like, number one, I don't think we should ever try to get their help. I knew I'd never have it, right?
Yes.
And even though, to this day, I have full custody of my son, I still can't see him.
Ugh.
And neither, like,
They can't go and remove him if you have a custody order?
What the police have told me for the last 2 years is that we can remove him, but he'll find his way back.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And
a lot of it. I know here in the States, like in with divorces, even if the child is underage to make the final decision, most likely they're going to lean towards. And I was sitting here listening to what you were saying, and a lot of your story parallels as far as the education part with the Tracy Thurman story. And I refer to this a lot because her story made a huge impact back on me back in the 80s when it happened. And where, and hers was a domestic violence incident where her now ex-husband nearly murdered her in front of her child. And and it's important because before Tracy Thurman, there were no domestic violence laws here in the U.S. A couple of our guests that we've had on have spoken of RAINN. And that's where RAINN comes from. They have roots in the Tracy Thurman story. But yeah, a lot the education part, because even though I follow the various cult movements and stuff, a lot of what you have said has put a different perspective on what I read. You can only get so much from a news article, or there've been a couple personal perspectives coming out lately. But your voice is definitely needed.
Do you have a lawyer, Esther?
I was able to get initially. I was able to get a lawyer, and she was very helpful. But recently, because we were supposed to have visits with him, which were very short and very supervised by my ex and then some of the family. And we, basically, it's just gotten less and less. And if I happen to drive into the yard and he's in the yard, then most of the time he just will quickly go in the house and shut the door. And I'll ask him about school. So I just don't really know at this point how much a lawyer could help me, I guess.
Yeah.
Because initially, it's just like it just takes so much control over their minds, and and it's hard because I was one of the people that taught him this too, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm telling him something different. And I did, like, I tried to explain it to my kids, like, one of the things that we had to do toward the end was, after listening to Warren's every revelation that we had to listen to them read to us in meetings, was everyone had to stand up and raise their hand if they believed this was the word of God. And of course, if you're in a building with 400 people, you're not. So it was like, okay, everybody, believes that this is the word of God, raise your hand, and everyone who doesn't, raise your hand. Well, there was never a hand went up when it said no, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, as I was leaving and trying to negotiate with my older children and just trying to, like I said, I know it, because one of my daughters said, she said, well, Mother, you raised your hand. You said you agreed. And I said, well, I tried to explain to her the psychology of it, right? I said, it was kind of like, Hitler putting a gun to your head and saying, will you do what I tell you to do? Of course you're going to say yes.
Yeah. And the gun to your head was, do this or you'll never see any of your kids.
Yeah. And I think you can control women when you
very much
through their children.
Absolutely.
Right?
They've been doing it for centuries.
So do you have a relationship with any of your children now?
I do with all 5 that have left. So my oldest, she of course like everybody, she most of us married very young. She was 15 and she was like, we're all told who to marry. So I hadn't seen her hardly at all for 10 years when I left. So I was able to reunite with her and her kids. So I have now her in my life, which I'm so grateful for. She's now going to nursing school, and we see each other every day. That's been so much fun, and I now can see her kids, and then I have 4 sons. Their youngest is 20, and the other 2 have partners and families, but they're all in this area. So,
and I have to think though, your youngest son, I have to think that when he gets old enough to realize that he's not getting a wife, that he may change his mind.
Well, and I tend to feel like that too, like maybe in 10 years, but it's still so hard to think, no, I want to see him today.
Of course, because you're missing out so much. Yeah, you want to be there for all of it, for sure. But at least I think you've got a good chance of getting him back.
I don't know.
Anybody, by the sounds of it, practically anybody under 50 is got a target on their back as far as, oh, well, we want more wives, so we're going to get rid of you guys somehow. That seems to be what's been happening.
Well, and I think, like, because I've had people ask me, do I think the polygamy thing is it about sex? I think I think maybe quite possibly for Joseph Smith it was, and for what?
I'm pretty sure it was for him.
But I think for the others of us who were raised, from kids to just believe this was something we had to live to avoid hell and go to heaven, then I don't think it was necessarily that. It was just a really, really deeply held belief that this is what we had to do. This was just required of us, right?
Do you think a lot of...
I think it has to do with power, too, because biblically, the more wives, the more concubines, the more property you had, the richer you were. And I think in Warren Jeff's twisted mind, that's what he's equating this all to. And I think, hopefully, I mean, this is just from my perspective, is that as his shit show goes on, more and more people are going to be abandoning, hopefully, the FLDS. I mean...
Well, yeah, it's true. Like, that, it is my hope that, because as long as he's in jail, then it seems like more and more people are leaving because they just can't, it just gets too much, right?
Yeah, for sure. And realistically, the community is going to end up dying out if nobody's allowed to have children anymore.
Just like the Quakers.
I don't know what end game is there other than just to, decide that if I'm going to be miserable in jail, then my people are going to be miserable along with me. That's
also, Warren Jeffs is likely to die in jail, so I imagine when he dies in jail, then a lot of people are going to bounce because obviously he's not going to gather up all his flock and his people and go meet Jesus or whatever. So that person. Oh, I also had a question. So you mentioned that you did have cell phones and things like that, and you went to nursing school and were able to become a registered nurse. How were you able to interact with the outside world? And were you obviously you weren't completely isolated? You mentioned that you had vehicles and things, but what were your restrictions like, and what were you told about the I guess people of the outside world that were not in the community?
So we were told that we were God's chosen people, and to keep ourselves as isolated as we possibly could. As I said, like nobody was allowed to go to public school. We did, like there was a few women, not very many, that were allowed to go to college, but during the whole time we were in college or when I went to work, it was only, for the good of the people, right? So we earned money to give to the prophet. We were not allowed to associate with my colleagues at work. Like I was only allowed, like say for example, they had a staff party, or I never went to their homes. They never came to our homes. We just, and we looked very different, all our dress, right? I'm sure you've seen some of the pictures. We did have cell phones, and for a while we also had the internet. And when I was younger, like my ex, for example, like he used to listen to CBC, like stuff like that occasionally, but it got so to the point where we were not allowed to do that, right? Like no TV, like we never had a TV growing up, no internet, no texting. We were allowed, like some people were allowed cell phones, but I can't remember if there was any other part to your question. Did I answer it, or?
Yeah, yes, you did. But like, what were you told? I mean, I guess you were just told that everybody outside your community was just evil and all going to hell, and that if you were like them, that you were a bad person too.
Well, and also that just the whole idea that polygamy could put a person in jail. That was always a big scary thing for me.
Oh, that's true.
It was like nobody could know that, our dad had more than one wife. Some men had half the kids call him uncle. Some of my friends that were my same age, like they were really old before they even realized that their dad was their dad. They had always called him uncle. So like some of the men went through great lengths to hide the fact that they had more than one wife, because, well, in the States, in the 50, there was a raid of the community in the States, the FLDS in the States in 1953, where they came in and took all the women and children and tried to put men in jail for living polygamy. And so there was always this fear, and it's still there today. I mean, obviously it's even more so right now because of Winston possibly facing jail time for living polygamy, right?
There's him and one or two other guys too, right?
Well, James Oler, he was the FLDS bishop, and there's already been a couple go to jail for the child trafficking, like the children that were taken over to be married to Warren at 12 and 13. But yeah, there was always just this big, like there was the fear that people were wicked, and they also were trying to get you to lose the righteous path, right?
Right.
They would try to persuade you in whatever means they could, because Satan was working to get people away from God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and then there was just the fear that once you had done something, then you would be excommunicated, and then so there was the fear of that, right?
Yes.
Like if you were seen associating with apostates, being people that had once lived in there and then left, like those are the worst, right? The absolute worst people are those that once had God's word and whatever, and then turned away from the light.
Yeah, that seems to be constant through just about every monotheistic.
Yes. Yeah.
If you change sorry.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Sorry. Were you shocked once you got out to learn more about Warren Jeffs and the real reason he was in jail, and what a really bad person that he really is?
Well, for a long time, because we heard, even though we weren't necessarily supposed to be, know that the investigation of Warren was taking place. And I mean, they obviously didn't want us to hear any of this, right? Like, they didn't want us to hear that he had molested girls or whatever. And we had high suspicion that he had married these young girls, but we just said, well, the thought was, in my mind, well, he wasn't actually having a relationship, a sexual relationship with them when they were only 12. I mean, God, he probably waited until later. I mean, I didn't know, but it was always like, you just never questioned it, right? Like, even if he was marrying him, even if he was, that he spoke with God and God must have told him to. I was a bit shocked, but I kind of suspected it already before I left, right? Like, although no one ever talked about it, and it was, I don't know, it is so hard. Like, it was hard. Like, to begin with, I just didn't want to even go there with my mind, right? It was like, if anyone said anything, like, even the first time somebody suggested to me that Joseph Smith might not be telling everyone, maybe that wasn't a good thing, it just kind of feels like a blow to your heart.
Right.
Like, it's so shocking when someone said to me, well, and even though, a lot of what we were taught didn't make sense, somehow it was just so sacred. Joseph Smith was like God, right? And the first time somebody said, oh, maybe Mormonism isn't, a good thing, or maybe, it's like, wow.
Did you ever hear that kind of stuff when you were working or when you were going to school? Like, were you ever confronted with that kind of attitude?
I wasn't. Like, I think people were tried to be quite respectful, I guess. Like, they didn't want to, like...
Well, it is Canada.
But at the same time, like, where I do say that I would love to tell people, if you do if you have an opportunity to talk in private with somebody, with a woman, especially from an fundamentalist community, what do you say to her, right?
Yeah, oh, for sure.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Did any of your coworkers or your fellow students even drop hints that they were trying to save you, so to speak, or did they just totally
let it
because
go?
They didn't know what to say? Like, I mean, I had a friend who was involved in a cult, and at the time, this was going back a good 20 years, what I said actually made the situation worse. And I could kick myself in the ass for saying that, but nobody knew back then.
Yeah.
This is what you're gearing, what you want to do toward, as far as educating other people.
Well,
what do you say to these people?
Yeah, no, you tread very, very lightly, because if, for example,
I'm not known for that.
Birth control was not allowed at all, and if, say, for example, because I remember one time when a doctor had maybe wanted to have a discussion with one of the women about birth control, and she went and told her husband, and then the word from our bishop was, okay, nobody sees that doctor.
Yeah.
So you have to be really careful. And I mean, my advice would be the first, I mean, I hope, and I don't know if we can, but like, I want you to try and, you have to make people, I think you have to make them feel safe. You have to make them feel like that they won't be ridiculed. They're not stupid people. They're definitely bad ideas, but I really feel like that if you could, because if you could assure them that probably what they say is not going to put their husband in jail, or their father, or their brother, and I don't know that for sure right now. But if you could also assure them that you're not necessarily trying to get them to leave, that you just want them to understand that They're, you know, I word it in my handout as like, you know, maybe you could tell a woman, if you have a headache, you're the only person that knows, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're the only person that could say whether you need to take Tylenol. You know, you don't maybe don't need to ask your husband
Yeah.
if you could take something, right? I mean, it's not like that was not something we did, I'm saying, but I'm just saying that it's the idea that you have,
yeah.
I mean, the idea that you could, like that you're an individual separate from your priesthood head,
Yes.
right? Like try to maybe, and like maybe you could say something like, I have spoken to women, like, okay, first thing is, I'm not trying to get you to leave your religion. I'm not trying to get you to leave your husband. But I just want you to know that I have talked to women who have left fundamentalist communities, and they have, you know, some regrets about allowing someone else to control their lives for that long.
I know there was a program I watched sometime in the past year, and I don't remember what it's called. I have it saved, so I'll dig it out. But it was dealing with leaving the Amish, and this woman was former Amish, and she set up basically, I guess you could call it like a halfway house in a sense that she offered a safe haven for people, not just women, leaving the Amish community, because as people know with the Amish, they basically do not have any skill sets that would they'd be able to support themselves on. Where in your case, you have a nursing degree, so that is upside. That's like you're one step above, you know, as far as that goes. And she actually would have these people live with her, and being that she was former Amish, she was able to relate. And what she's trying to do is not just with the Amish community, but with other sects, create these like halfway houses for people leaving FLDS and stuff like that. And just something I want to throw in. We keep referring to the Blackmore case, and people might not know exactly what it is. And Blackmore was basically sentenced for taking,
Not yet.
like you said, taking it.
Convicted. Huh? Not sentenced.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna say, for taking a child from Canada to the U.S. to marry Warren Jeffs. I have a link that I'll throw. It's from the CTV. That actually follows the case, so I'll put that in the.
Because that was just adjudicated. What, 2 or 3 months ago, Esther? It wasn't that long ago.
Yes.
Well,
sorry.
According to this, it says a British Columbian judge who sentenced a former husband and wife to jail.
So yeah, this is different than Winston, right?
Okay.
So the husband and wife that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was Brandon. Sorry, I got the names confused.
No, that's okay. Like, they're brothers, right?
Yeah.
They're both Blackmores, and so there's obviously more people that are guilty of this, right? Because there was seven girls from Canada that went down. They weren't all like they weren't all 12 or 13. There were some that were 16 and 17.
Yeah. So this is actually a lot wider than I realized.
In terms of
peoples involved.
Oh yeah.
Holy moly.
I read, maybe a year or two ago, I read a book. It's called Prophets Pray by Sam Brower.
Yes.
And he's one of the, I don't know if I remember correctly, he was a private investigator.
Yes.
But he worked with law enforcement and was one of the people who helped to bring Warren Jeffs to justice. So
yes, that's my understanding as well.
Yeah, it was a very disturbing account.
think they just released a documentary of the same name last year. Check it out. I think it's on Netflix or Hulu. I remember watching it.
So this gets like really fucked up.
Oh
Wow.
Most cults do.
Yeah. Here I think I'm getting a handle on something, and then
it throws you through a loop.
So one of the latest things, well, for years in Canada, they've been trying to figure out how to prosecute polygamy, and it's really difficult because you know, you have people say, well, do you put everybody in jail who has more than one partner? And then there's also the idea that polygamy is more the way it's lived in Bountiful and with the FLDS, it's more like slavery. That's the problem.
Yeah.
But there was a reference case in I think 2006 or where they were in Vancouver, where they were trying to decide, okay, you know, could they prosecute? And I guess they said polygamy was wrong as it was lived in Bounty. And anyway, so Winston on March the 9th, Winston Blackmore and James Oler we're supposed to hear what's going on with that now. It's, you know, it's pretty easy to prove that they're in celestial marriages to a lot of women. And, you know, it's, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the answer is, really.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of, like, even here in Cranbrook, there's children who are, you know, there's families that have left both sides, the Winston and the Warren, but yet they're still intact as a polygamous family.
Yes.
And, you know, like, the women are older and the kids are, you know, teenagers, and how do you help that family, right?
Right.
And the children are going to school, and other students are asking them questions about, you know, does your dad have more than one wife, and is he going to jail, and, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think,
you know,
as far as prosecuting, it would have to come down, like in your case, you were indoctrinated into it as a child. Even, you know, so someone that's been in it as a lifer, in your case, you know, how can you hold them responsible for being fucking brainwashed? But then, you know, yeah, that's a really sticky wicket. I mean, where do you draw that line of, if that's all you have ever known, and if you're isolated to the point?
Yeah.
Wow.
Go ahead, yes, sir.
Well, I just feel like, too, it's like really a lot of the men, not all of them, but some of the men, I don't think, you know, they didn't really have a choice either as to whether they should marry.
Right.
Like, they never have a choice as to who they're going to marry either, right? They're told just like we're told. I know that, you know, people like Winston and Warren really tried to, like, they would try to get women to ask to marry them, and, you know, marry them to themselves. So in those cases, it's definitely, you know, different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess my thought would be if somehow we could, you know, say, okay, everyone that's married now, maybe come and, you know, register your marriage with us, and then if any more happen,
then you have a problem.
Yeah. Well, I have a hard time accepting that people like Oler, Blackmore's, Jeff's don't know what they're doing is fucking wrong. And
I think that's where it comes into.
Yeah, I think I mean, this is just my personal opinion, is don't go after the little people. Go after the bigwigs and prosecute them for instilling this idea into the followers when they know it's illegal. And it's been illegal in this country since, what, the 1850s?
What Esther was saying about for the rank and file member, that's your sincerely held religious belief. But I was going to ask, do you think that those people like Jeffson, Blackmore, and whatnot actually believe that, or are they just using it for power?
Yeah.
I think that there's enough evidence to prove that Jeffs was definitely using it for power, especially the way he was going out about things. I mean, there's enough evidence there to put him away for ever, essentially. And yeah, I do think that prosecutorial discretion is probably the best way to go about this, is to go after the top people, and then, you know, maybe we don't go after the little people, because I mean, first of all, it'd be harder to get a conviction against them because they do have that defense that, hey, I was just, you know, told this from birth. You know, how are you going to hold me responsible? I didn't intend for, you know, to break the law. I was told I was going to go to hell. And, you know, that is a compelling, you know, argument to make, that, you know, and nobody would want to, I don't think, punish that person for, you know, being misled like that. But the people who know better, I think they do need to be prosecuted. I mean, and I think there's plenty of evidence to show that they know what they were doing is wrong. And it's all about power, and it's all about control.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I think in Jeff's case and in other cases similar to that, it's not about polygamy, it's about trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, especially when you're telling a child of the age of 16, okay, you have to marry this 50-year-old man, you know, you can't prosecute the 16-year-old as equally culpable as the 50-year-old. You know, that's just not, you know, that's the 50-year-old should know better, and the person who's arranging that marriage, to me, that would be trafficking.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's you know, it's similar to in other religions, as far as I can tell. The Muslim religion, like, you know, we all see it's bad and it's wrong. I just think the approach to stop it is where we don't really, you know, we're all baffled. Like,
yeah, because the way they've done it, teaching people that even the most caring and you know, somebody with the softest approach, they're really, you know, they're trained to see the devil horns on them, even though they're the sweetest, nicest, kindest person who only wants to help you have a good life and whatnot. They're trained to see them as Satan incarnate and to never believe anything they say. So it's so hard to, even like you were saying, to even try and figure out how to approach somebody and offer your ear or your couch or whatever, because they're convinced that you're trying to send them to hell forever.
Well, and, you know, like, basically, if you were to, you know, talk to a fundamentalist woman and, you know, even seem like you're trying to get her to, you know, stand up for herself, realize that she has rights, what you're actually asking her to do is leave everything that she knows. It's not, maybe she doesn't even believe, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She's just like, but for me, it was like, you know, I eventually tried to hide the fact that I wanted to use birth control. I didn't want to have more kids, but I didn't really know who I could trust.
Right.
Even healthcare professionals, like, I didn't know if, you know, because it would be the end for me if anyone found out that I was taking something.
For sure.
But I just feel like that if you can somehow come across to this person, like, you know, that you're not, you don't wish any bad thing to happen to them. You just want to help them so that they don't have regrets later in life. And you know, we've told my sister, she's been trying to convince her daughter to leave forever, and she said, okay, like, you know, as your children get older, like, they may not come with you, you know.
Yeah.
Like, there's an easier time, you know, when you do have small children than when they get older and they're so indoctrinated they will never come with you. I know one of the things that was a huge factor in me realizing, like, when I started working at the hospital as a nurse, was just how nice people were. And, you know, we had been told that that the only good people were people that were part of this community, and that's not true. And when you can see that for yourself, that, you know, this person doesn't even have to be nice to me, but they are. They're just a good person. And so
I just wonder if even, you know, if you had occasion to talk to someone, to ask them, would they be more comfortable if you said, oh, well, can you tell me about your community or tell me about your faith? Like, would that put them at ease, do you think, from that approach? Just a thought.
Like if somebody had asked me that, like, I don't know. I would have definitely been very guarded as to what I would have told.
Right. You're worried, of course, about the polygamy.
Yes.
Too.
And that's why I think it's so hard, because as soon as you make it against the law, like, you only make people quieter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, it's just a hard situation. But I mean, I do feel like that, if, like, when I go back, anytime I do see my children, like if I happen to wander by and they're in the yard or whatever, like it's a drive for me to go back. Like and if I ever see my ex there, I try to tell him all the good news things that are happening with his children that he never sees. Just because it's like they hear everything bad that happens, and they say, we recently lost a nephew to suicide. That he had
sorry.
He had left a couple years ago, and I'm sure that story will be told within the FLDS as well. No wonder he had left.
That happens when you leave. You end up killing yourself and going to hell.
Yeah, so it's those kinds of things. Like, I just feel like that, maybe if you do have a positive story of somebody that you have met that has, found an okay life beyond, right? So that it's not so personal, right?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, actually, before we wrap up, is how has it been for you? It's only, 5 years isn't that long, really. How has it been for you to be out now?
In terms of what? Just everything?
Yeah, see, you look like you're a pretty contented lady, and you've got a career, and you've at least got some kids to be with and grandkids, and has it been, was it a tough transition for you, or were you just so done that you were ready to leave it all behind?
I was definitely very much ready to leave it all behind, and I'm very grateful. I met a friend, and he encouraged me to go to one of the first Imaginary Religion conferences that I went to, and I now have attended 3, and I really am so grateful for that community. I want to live, I find a lot of joy in a more evidence-based life, for sure. And I have no regrets of leaving. But it's just been such a grieving process.
Yeah.
Feeling like that, that my children are stuck. So stuck, and I feel bad for them, but at the same time, I've just tried to focus on the fact that, I have some pretty amazing kids, and they're doing so well, and I'm so proud of them. And I try to remember to tell them how that as often as I can. I can be with my grandkids, and it's been so important to me. And I just feel like that, as I was telling you before we went on the air, that I just, I feel compelled, I feel obligated to just because I feel like that people don't know how to help if they don't know what's going on, right?
Yeah. It helps to have that perspective, so you have a better chance of being able to see things from that other person's point of view, I think. And it's a lot harder.
A lot of aspects of your story remind me of Vicky Garrison from No Longer Quivering. And I compare Vicky's story to a person like Michelle Duggar from 19 Kids and Counting. I think they're 21 now. But it's like, here you have somebody like yourself, like Vicky, who, you know, left their fundamentalist sect and made a life for themselves now outside of it. You know, you're both free thinkers and stuff like that. They watch their kids blossom and grow outside of the religious bullshit. Then you have Michelle Duggar.
Yeah, I don't. I don't really know.
I mean, it's like,
well, they're the so the Quiverful movement is similar in that they don't believe in any birth control, and they believe that God should dictate how many children they have, and it's based on a specific verse that says something to the effect of a happy man has a full quiver or some shit.
Well, yeah, I actually did. I did listen to. She spoke at the INR conference, Vicky. But I was just saying I don't know that much about the Duggars, I guess. But I certainly don't have regrets about leaving. But I don't know. I just think that the whole grieving process is probably the hardest for everybody.
And I honestly think, and I've had a lot of people pass in my life, and I think for me at least, it would be a lot harder to have lost somebody that was still there that I just couldn't be with. So I can understand how draining and challenging that would be for sure. And to have several people in your life that you just, you know, they're lost, but they're not lost.
Well, and I think that a lot of us have run across, you know, people just have such a hard time understanding, you know, why would you stay? Why would you give over everything? You know, they don't understand. And they think that you had a choice in you know, having children, you know?
It's not, though. Really, and I don't believe that anybody who is raised in a fundamentalist or even a not so fundamentalist, where they have a religion that they are indoctrinated into to believe, I don't think they really make true choices about those things. I'm always talking about women who were raised Muslim and say, I chose to wear a hijab. I say, no, you don't know any other way. You just chose to be more religious, but you didn't choose that belief. The only people I believe chose that are converts, and then I kind of wonder at that. But you know,
I've asked the question of women that have left the community, because I mean the ones that are in there, you can't talk to them, but you know, I've said if you did not have this belief that you needed to live polygamy, then would you choose to? And every time the answer is no.
Yeah.
So I think that could be said of the hijab as well. Like if you didn't, you know, if this had no ties to, you know, to anything, would you wear it?
I've never heard of a woman, and maybe there are some out there, but I've never seen them who don't necessarily have a particular faith, but went, you know, I prefer to be super modest, so I'm going to learn how to wear a hijab. Like that. Yeah. Lots of women out there like to be modest, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't see them going, you know, let me go find a fundamentalist religion and get them to teach me how to dress. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, something that you said, Esther, that really stuck out for me was, you know, controlling women through their children. You know, when you marry, when you basically force a child at the age of 16 to get married, and by the time she's 17, she has a child. Well, then, so you controlled her up until she was married because she was a child and she didn't have any autonomy. And then, not that you had autonomy after that, but then you know, she's got children that you can hang a hold over her head. So it's not like you can just walk away, you know, and just say, well, I'm just going to take my kid and leave. You know,
Yeah.
it's so they have that to hold over you. So
I think too, a lot of times girls in that situation, the child is, if it's possible, might even be more important to them because they feel like this is the one person in my life that, you know, is going to love me for me, and there's no major conditions at that point. Like if you're with a husband, you have to obey them. If you aren't being, quote, a good enough wife, then they might have what you think is an excuse to maybe mistreat you or get rid of you or what have you. That child becomes someone who, you know, they form a bond with that they can't get from anyone else in families that are structured like that. At least that it would make sense to me that it would be even more important to them. And then, you know, she's going to want to maintain that relationship even more fiercely than just if it was a regular relationship. At least that makes sense.
Well, and you know that polygamy makes single moms out of everybody, because you know how much time and energy does and have when you've got that many kids. I mean, Winston has more than 150 children.
Damn.
It's probably closer to 160 of his biological family, and you know, I mean, it's really unfair to those children.
It is. Absolutely is.
It puts so, you know, just it puts kids in poverty, and it's just so unnecessary, right?
Yeah.
When, you know, when you control every aspect of their lives and they don't even have a chance, you know, they go to school, they go to church, everything is just totally, you know, indoctrinated into them. And so
everything is basically scripted in one way or another. You know, when
Mhm.
when you're a child, you go to church and you get homeschooled and you do this and that. And when you get to be a certain age, then you're going to either get a job or get married, and then you're going to have kids. And that, like, every single step is just scripted in some way. It's just,
Well, and I mean, I've heard it say, you know, from other women in the States, there's lots of stories where they say, you know, if this is heaven, then give me hell.
yeah.
I told my husband, if, you know, if I'm going to go to hell, then let me die first. Because it does get, you know, very difficult to live in that much fear, and
Oh, yeah.
to feel like to love your kids and to want to be there for them is a sin. You know, and you can be punished because you don't want to just, I mean, one of my sons was 18 when he was told to leave, and you know, I was to have no contact, and I said, you know what, I didn't sign up for this. You know, I didn't have kids so that I could just say, okay, see you later. I feel like it's wrong. It's morally wrong. And you know, I've talked to many people about it. And then, yeah.
Isn't it funny how people's morals tend to be better than that of whatever God they're supposed to be following?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, yeah.
I got a question. Kind of backtracks a bit, but you mentioned again about individuals that have been forced to leave. Now, I'm assuming it's kind of like excommunication. Is anybody tracking how these people are doing at all? Or, I mean, what's happening with them? Does anybody know?
With happening with who?
Those that are forced to leave. Are they staying with the Mormon faith? Are they leaving the faith altogether? Are they being killed? Are
as far as I know, I haven't heard of any. Yeah, no, like,
I'm just wondering if anybody tracks them.
I don't, like, we all have lost touch with a lot of them. The men that were told to go when Brian was, one went to Victoria, one went to Penticton. I mean, and this is just rumor. I don't really know. My ex had gone up a couple hours from our home, and then, like I said, like they're not allowed back.
Yeah.
So was your ex allowed back when you left? Because it sounds like he's back with the kids that are there.
Yeah, he was allowed back, and he's been the only man that I know that has been allowed back. So yeah, he continues to live there with the family. I would like to. How much time do we have left?
Well, we're actually kind of slightly over time.
Oh, okay. All right. Then I won't add anything else major. Then.
If there's anything, go ahead. That's fine.
Well, I just I wanted, like, we've talked about the idea of rape within the community, right? You're married to a man who you don't know. I knew his name. And then a few days later, like, a lot of women, I think more so second, third, like plural wives. So they're having, their husband's having sex with them pretty early on, like within days of being married. I was, then after I left, someone was talking to me about it, and the concept of rape came up, and I had never thought of it as rape. Because I felt like that I wasn't saying no. I wasn't, I was trying to make him feel like this is exactly what I wanted.
Right.
Because there's no way I was gonna, go to hell for not being obedient and, not loving my husband. And so, I mean, how do you feel about that? In terms of, like, what do you call it? Is it rape?
Rape.
It is, but I guess like with the older guys for sure, because they know what's going on. But if there was a young guy who just, this was his first wife, and he's told, "Here's your wife, you're married, now go have kids," how culpable is that guy, because he doesn't know any different necessarily either? That's a tough one.
This is something that I've, as part of the Me Too conversation that I've been talking about with several people lately. And it touches on the idea that consent, everybody really gets wrapped around the axle about consent. But that I think to have an honest conversation about sexual dynamics between men and women, consent in and of itself is just insufficient, because lots and lots of women will consent to something that they don't want because the alternative is worse. So you're consenting. You didn't say no. You consented, but you didn't want it. You didn't enjoy it. I mean, you consented because you had to. You didn't feel like you had a choice. You didn't feel like saying no was an option. If I say no, that makes me a bad wife and I'll go to hell. So, so it's, I don't know if rape is the right label for that, or sexual assault, but I definitely think that that's a really important conversation to have. Why do women, quote unquote, consent when they don't really want to?
Yeah, and I think that people get so wrapped around like the legal definitions, and they stop the conversation there. They say, well, legally this would be, it's a gray area, so, let's just not talk about it. And I do think that we do have to go beyond legal definitions, because guess what? The law kind of sucks. Like, I study it. Like, and it doesn't keep up with reality. Like, it doesn't really address a lot of those gray areas. That's why we have lawyers.
We shouldn't be setting the bar at technically not rape.
Yeah, exactly. We shouldn't be setting the bar there and then just throw out everything else. I mean, we forget about that there's power dynamics there. I mean, some people consent out of fear. Again, it goes back to the analogy of having a gun to your head. Did you really consent? I mean, you agreed. But yeah, it goes back to that, and I feel like there is more nuance to it, but that we have to be willing to discuss it and definitely recognize that there's something wrong there.
And we have to be able to have the conversation. We have to be able to have the conversation without insisting that we put labels on it. Like, let's figure out what it is and how we feel about it and whether or not it's okay before we decide to label it. And then we start arguing about whether it meets the definition of that label.
That makes
and
sense.
I think
there was
in a situation.
Sorry, what, Beth?
I was going to say there was a term that Morgan used earlier in one of the other analogies we used when we were talking about the cultural, what you're raised in, and I can't think of what she said, but I think the nuance has to be there. I mean, my blunt instinctual is, yeah, it's rape.
Well, and I think too. I think too.
Saying,
I'm sorry, Beth. I didn't mean to step on you there.
Oh no, you're fine.
I think that if that's something that you, Esther, or a woman in your position is looking back and reevaluating that and thinking, in retrospect, now I don't know how to feel about those experiences. I don't think. I think that is totally 100% legitimate, and I think that people need to validate that and understand it and listen to it and support you through it, because somebody saying, well, yeah, but you were married and you were just awkward teenagers and you didn't say no, and that's just the way it is, that's just really dismissive. So I think whatever you may be feeling, or like I said, if it's not you or a woman in your position, I think it's completely legitimate to look back, no matter how many years ago that was, and think, maybe I have some residual trauma from that part of the experience. And I think that there's a lot of legitimacy to that.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of this conversation, too, is prior to 1981, there really were no domestic violence laws pertaining to marital rape. So you're talking a whole boatload, generations that were taught that you submit to your husband. If he wants to fuck you, he's gonna fuck you, whether you want it or not. Excuse my language. But that's what it comes down to, and it wasn't until people like Tracy Thurman and the numerous women that, preceded and postceded her, and groups like RAINN and the other DV groups that have, brought this conversation to the fore, and then it went quiet. And now all of a sudden we're getting that backlash. But when you have somebody like in your case who was raised in this dynamic where you submit to your husband, no matter what.
I mean, after I was married, it was 2 years, and I gave birth to a child. I was probably pregnant with another before I really dared even speak to my husband, like have a natural conversation, because you come into his home and you're trying to get to know somebody with his wife there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, then you got that whole mess with the polygamy. In your case, it's like, it's no wonders. I mean, or that, what do you call it? It's
and I guess it doesn't matter. It is just, like you mentioned, how do you feel about it? I guess it's just another way, like, for example, when women have left the community, then they can get help if they, one of the questions are asked is, are you leaving an abusive situation? And most of us say no, because
that's what you know. That's all you know.
Yeah.
Well, and we didn't realize that, having no money, having no control of where you lived or who you lived with, or, or your body, that sort of thing. We didn't realize that was abuse. And so a lot of women have said no, and so they don't qualify for help.
And also,
and to try to throw a little kink in it.
Well, hang on for a second. I know Mike Presswitch in the chat's been making a whole bunch of comments, and I'm sorry I haven't gotten to any.
Go for it.
One of the points he made is that in Esther's case, she was the second wife and would have had no legal standing either.
Yeah.
That marriage wouldn't
that's a really good point.
under the law. So that's a good point.
Yeah,
there.
From a legal standpoint.
Yeah, and he did say hi, Esther, at the beginning of the show.
Oh, okay. Hi, Michael.
And Trippin was there at some point in Carrie 81. I'm terrible I didn't get to you guys, but we were having such a good talk here. But I think we do kind of have to wrap things up, sadly, because it's.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I mean, I've been following the Blackmore and the Bountiful case, and I'll tell you one thing, Esther. I'm woefully uninformed because here I thought I knew a lot, and I'm like, oh fuck, I know jack shit. It's like,
well,
it's amazing that I won't say hidden in the sense, it's out there. It's just finding it. I didn't realize so much of
it's not being talked about that much.
Yeah, thank you. Leave it to Deb to find my words.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Exactly.
I just want to say one more thing, and I don't know, maybe everybody tells you that you talk to about this tells you this, Esther, but I mean, I'm so humbled by, I have a hard time imagining the kind of courage it took you to live the life that you lived, and then how much even more than that it took you to leave and start over. I'm just in awe of the strength that it had to take to live your life in that situation and raise so many children with that constant pressure and constant fear and so little autonomy, and yet you still managed to raise all those kids and get yourself out and start a new life. So I just wanted to pass that on, that I think that that's really amazing, and I hope that that's something that you hear a lot, and if you don't, you should hear it more.
Well, thank you.
I think it's amazing that just 5 years out that you're speaking about this publicly, and I give you mega kudos because I do know quite a few people that have been in similar, for lack of a better word, situations who can't even talk about their experiences. So
yeah,
we need more people like you. I mean, I'm not forcing people to tell their stories because they're not ready, obviously. But
absolutely. But and just to say, so Carrie says, just want to say to Esther, welcome to the bright side. You're an inspiration. Peace and love to you, my sister, she says.
Okay,
and,
thank you.
Mike was saying that part of it is that people choose to be ignorant about these sorts of things because they just want to believe, like we said at the beginning of the show, that they're just a bit quirky and they're doing their own thing, and you shouldn't mess with people's religions. And he also makes the point that people don't want to be seen as being a religious bigot, and so they don't speak up and they don't talk about these things. And that's why I'm a firebrand, because I just talk about it.
That's why I'm an asshole and very blunt at times.
Yep.
Well, thank you all so much.
Sorry, if you're gonna brand your wife or wives or your followers, I'm gonna talk about you. That's going back to Nimex.
So, Esther, thank you so much for hanging out with us and spending extra time with us. It was great to know, and like we said, your story really, really needs to be told. So, and while we're talking, if you could tell everybody, because you are going to be speaking soon, and let them know where they can go to hear you speak, that'd be awesome. And if you have any other blogs or sites or anything you want to promote, you do.
It's the American Secular Conference. I mean, not American, Alberta.
Yes.
So I will post it. I'll send it to you on Facebook. That's probably the easiest because I don't really,
Yeah.
It's Nate Phelps is one of the ones that organizes it. So yeah, I hope to go there and basically just carry on, try to inform people.
Well, Nate was talking about you on Facebook today, so there you go.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. And
please tell me you'll come back.
Oh, yeah, sure, right? We could probably carry on for 2 more hours, couldn't we?
Oh, yes. Well, I ran into her at the conference in Toronto in June, and I said, this is one of the reasons why I love going to these, because we were just hanging out at the drink counter. I think I was getting a tea or something, and we just and she's like, oh, well, I was in the FLDS. I'm like, pardon? You need to come on my show and tell us all about it. So absolutely. So again, thank you so much. And ladies, Beth, where do we find you?
Easiest way is on Twitter, Dune9998. That connects to my blog, Havoc and Chaos. Just added another 30 stories about abuses within the church, like diddling children and stealing money and all that fun shit. Yeah,
I'm really good at that. Clergy, for some reason.
Yeah, well, it's not just clergy. It's treasurers and deacons and elders and, oh, I'm a special snowflake. I'm going to diddle this child. Oh, I'm going to steal some money. Yeah, I got another 15 already lined up. But anyways, that connects to the blog. Then it also connects to Facebook and YouTube. And I'm also on Google, but I don't do much on Google. I haven't quite figured that.
Yeah.
I like it, but I don't like it. It's just not... I want it to be. But
I hear you. I don't even have the patience to blog, so there you go. And Morgan, where do we find you?
All right, well, you can find me on the By Skeptical podcast with Trav Mamone. Comes out about every 2 weeks. Our most recent episode, we are fact-checking Trump's State of the Union.
Oh, good luck with that.
Yeah, here's a pro tip. We did not even get through all of the lies. So, yeah, there's that. And we talk about Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop conference and all that good stuff. And you can also find me and Tracy's Facebook page, The Political Feminist, on Facebook. And you can find my personal page on Facebook, Morgan L. Stringer, and follow me on Twitter at Mostring. That's MOSTRING. And also, I was on the last episode of No Religion Required, my old podcast, which should be on iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher.
Yeah, definitely. And Tracy, where do we find you?
I am Godless Mama on Facebook, and my blog is godlessmama.com, and I'm on Twitter at the Godless Mama. And if you follow me there, I'm hoping within the next few days, my episode 1 of my podcast will be released.
Yeah, so Tracy's striking it out on her own. And so we're kind of sad to say that this will be her last show with us, but we're happy that she's doing her own thing and taking on a new project. So there's a positive.
Cash would be proud.
Falling on my face.
Yeah. Oh, she's fine. I taught her how to use Audacity, so she's good. She's good to go for now.
I'd still be trying to figure it out right now.
I just knew we belong to a podcasters group, and there's some wonderful people in there and some really smart people in there. But a lot of them, they're audio files, so they know a shit ton more about that stuff than we do. And I just knew from experience that they were going to tell her a bunch of stuff that she would look at and go.
Sometimes they can go.
Which is exactly what happened.
Yeah,
they go over the top.
They do go over the top because they're very good at what they do, and they know a lot of stuff that I don't know. And so I'm like, let's just start from the basics. But anyway, good luck to you.
Work up from there.
Thank you.
And we hope you you get lots of listeners. It turns out
This has been really fun.
Awesome. Well, it's been great to have
well, your
you.
input is greatly appreciated, and you give a voice that, needs to be heard. You've changed my mind on a few things.
There you go. That's not easy, let me tell you.
My work here is done.
And of course, you can find me over on Holy Crap, the vlogcast. That runs on Sunday mornings at 12:05 a.m. on YouTube, and you can also find it at holycraptv.com or holycrapthevlogcast.com. And yeah, that's coming with several panelists, and we talk about all different things, and it's hosted by Shuji Tribble. And then you will also hear me on Full Chronic, my relatively new show. I just put out my 10th episode, so it's hard to believe it's 10 episodes already of chronic nonsense. It just gets weirder every time. Although this time we finally are getting into a story. We're talking about Solomon and Sheba. So, I mean, a story other than listening to the story of Moses and, all those, we've heard Moses like 4 or 5 times now. We've heard the Abraham story. We've heard the Lot story. We've heard all of these guys. So, Solomon and Sheba, I'm like, holy shit, it's a new story. I'm excited. As much as you can get excited about the Quran, anyway. So, yeah, you can find that at www.fullchronic.com. And I'm also on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. So, and that's usually every Friday, early Saturday, I'll have a new episode out. So I'm keen to find out what happened with Solomon and Sheba this week. So there you go. And I'm hoping I might have a lead on finding a Muslim to debate. So I'm excited about that too. So anyway, that's Fall Chronic, and we will be here next week. And we didn't put out a show on Monday because we did one last Thursday, which was David Silverman. So if you haven't seen or heard that yet, you should definitely go check that out. The rest of the ladies couldn't make it, but that's okay. They wouldn't have gotten a word in edgewise anyway, because I barely did. But we love David.
That stupid thing called a job gets in the way.
I know. But he did say to say hello to everybody. So do check that out. And then next week, we are going to be talking to Armin Bobby, the founder of the Atheist Republic, and he's going to talk to us about what's going on in Iran right now. He's a Iranian ex-Muslim, of course, and he's been paying really close attention to what's going on in Iran. He's been keeping track of the protesters that have been arrested. The protests have pretty much died down, but there's still a lot going on, and so we're going to hear from him and find out what's happening, because I know just this week we're hearing more about more women who are getting up and ripping off that hijab and saying, fuck you, I don't want to wear this thing. So
speaking of women and ripping off their hijabs, I don't know if it was you that posted it. It probably was, because I get most of my news from you as far as that goes. But there was a video a video meme of the old lady. My God, yeah, it was you, because I posted on there that woman's got more cojones than most men I know.
Yeah, Armin had posted that. It was a wonderful video of this ancient little old lady in Iran with a cane who crawled up on top of like a cement. I don't know if it was like a half wall or something, with her cane, and ripped off that damn hijab and was waving it around. So that was a beautiful thing to see. So
yes, it was so cool.
So we're going to hear from Armin what's going on over in Iran next week, which of course will be our usual time, Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. So we look forward to seeing you then. And I think because we're a whole half hour over, which is great because we haven't done that in ages. So that's totally fine. Again, thank you, Esther, so much for joining us. It was a great time, and we will definitely have to talk to you again soon, because there's just so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
until then, and just so you know, we're going to play a little something a friend of ours wrote. The Human Creed for Mankind takes about 2 minutes, and that'll be it. So until next week, we will leave you with that, and we'll see you then.
Bye.
I know the truth and power of reason and of rational thinking, and I will use them to my advantage. I know the truth and power of educating myself and of expanding my intellectual boundaries, and I will educate myself. I know the truth and power of vanquishing ignorance, and I will do so whenever the opportunity presents itself. I know the truth and power of morality without supervision, and of true and accurate righteousness. I know the truth and power of obliterating tyranny, be it intellectual, emotional, or philosophical, and will work toward that goal whenever and however possible. I know the truth and power of human ingenuity. I know the truth and power of human compassion, and I will be mindful of the welfare of others. I know the truth and power of equality and fairness for all living things. I know the truth and power of the importance of our families, our friends, and our fellow men and women. I know the truth and power of human stewardship of our lands, our waters, and our skies, and I will try to act to preserve our environment. I know the truth and power of the sciences of mathematics, of physics, and of chemistry, and of the important role of these disciplines in understanding the workings of this cosmos. I know the truth and power of the rejection of all notions or beliefs that reside in the supernatural or the superstitious, and of those notions or beliefs that we are not supposed to be able to explain. And I know that these rejections are necessary for humankind's survival. I am a human being with a free mind, liberated from irrational influence and from unreasonable dogma.